Good morning, afternoon or evening to everyone, depending on where in the world you are joining us from. Firstly, let me introduce myself. I'm Brian Brookman, Chief Scientific Officer for Proficiency Testing at LGC. And I'm very pleased to be able to chair our panel discussion today on product integrity on show, labelling under the microscope, which is being hosted by LGC Axio Proficiency Testing. I think this is a fascinating subject in terms of how product labels have evolved over the years. Indeed, labels have been around for hundreds of years, with the first labels reported to have been developed in the early 1700s to mark the contents of pharmaceutical containers. Printed product labels are reported to have been used from around 1800. But over the time, the purpose of the label has evolved to be more than just informing the reader the contents of the bottle or the can, packet, and so on. They now perform many functions, from marketing to informing consumers about the product itself, its ingredients, origin, durability, hazards, and how to use or consume it safely. Indeed, labelling of products is also now about marketing of a product to a customer. In many cases, the label and the name of the product is designed to project messages about the brand, including its quality, value, provenance, and indirectly overall trust. So I'm really looking forward to hearing from our expert panel members today. So let me introduce our panel. So I'm joined today by Valerie Barden, the Global Product Manager for LGC Axio PT, Savas Satoris, the Technical Development Manager for LGC Axio PT, and Paul Klinger, the Business Development Director for LGC Informed. Now we've got some great questions, but if anybody has any further questions, if they'd like to put them in the into the question box, we will try and take as many questions as we can. But if we don't get around to answering them all, we will certainly answer them after the event and let you know our answers. So that's enough from me. Let's put the first question to our panel, which very much really follows on from my introduction. Product labels, at least as they are used today, can mean a lot of different things to different people. But how do you see them in terms of a representation of the actual product itself? Maybe I could turn to you first, Savas.
Yes, thank you, Brian. So labeling applies to most prepackaged products. We are talking about prepackaged products. Let's make sure that everyone understands that. So information such as the name of the food, ingredient list, allergens, nutritional analysis, or the date marking are always present on the label, or they should be present. So basically, to sell food or beverages, you need to provide essential information to the end consumer so that they can make an informed decision. So the information on the label, it must be accurate, easy to see, easy to understand, and not misleading. So I know the question says that product labels can mean a lot of different things to different people, but if the information on the label is accurate, then the meaning to different people shouldn't be so different, if that makes sense. And the more accurate the information is on the label, the higher the consumer protection. For example, allergens. If there is an allergen present and it's not on the label, then it might be dangerous for some allergic consumers.
Just to add on that, and on the nutrition information part of your answer, Savas, we see more and more that a number of countries have introduced what is called front of pack labeling. So it's an easy way to explain and to understand, of course, for the customers, the nutritional quality of the product. For instance, in France, we have what is called a Nutri-Score, and the Nutri-Score will assign to a product a single rating letter. It will be from A, the best, to E, the worst, with an associated color code, green to red. In the UK, there is the traffic light. The traffic light repeats the nutritional information, but it's also associated with a red, amber, green color code. So it's easier for the customer to pick the information. And one last thing about this front of pack labeling, it's not mandatory to provide this information in Europe yet, but the European Commission is working on a proposal to try to standardize this front of pack labeling nutrition information, at least at EU level.
If I could just add, beyond the label, the ingredients and everything, which is very important, obviously, this is really the first impression that a consumer has of that brand when they're holding that product, in their hand at the store. They have choices between several, sometimes dozens of products. It could be very confusing for them. So having very clear, concise information about what the product is, what the product does, like I said, it could be confusing. And if they're confused, they're going to put the bottle back and they're going to look for something else. So really making sure that it's accurate information, it's not misleading information, but really clearly stating what that product is and what it does.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you for that. And we've talked a little bit there really about the different or some of the information that goes on the label. But I'd be interested to perhaps talk about what work goes on in terms of getting that information to include on the label. And maybe I could turn that back to you, Savas, again, firstly.
Yes. So obviously you have a food product, so you need to create a label for it to have the protein content, the ingredients, the fat content, and everything. So there are two main ways of doing that. So you're either going to analyze the product, so proceed with analytical testing of the actual food product, and then have a value for fat, for protein, for everything. And we as Axio offer a whole range of PT samples for nutritional analysis in various different matrices for fat content, protein, and all these nutritional analytes. But in addition to analytical testing, you can also create the label from a calculation or from the recipe, so to estimate the content based on the ingredient list, sometimes using a database or just a calculation based on the recipe. It depends, I guess, in which part of the world you live in. And we, as Axio, again, we offer a PT sample for food labeling, which is based on calculation, not on analytical testing, and compliance with the regulation. Currently, this is available from customers for customers in Europe, but in the future, it can become available for customers in other jurisdictions as well. I don't know if Paul, did you have anything to?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, obviously the analytical, the testing piece of this and getting the accurate information, on the label is important, but depending on the product, there's a lot that goes in prior to production. So that could be studies, trials, once they come up with a formula, they create, pre-production samples, they do trials ensuring that the formula is accurate. So for efficacy, and and also establishing dosage. And so, there's a lot of work ahead of time to make sure that what they're putting on the label is accurate, and the consumer's getting, the most of the product and the effectiveness of the product.
Okay,
yes.
Thank you. I think Savas, you talked about a sort of, the PT for the labeling, but of course, I think in terms of any of the ingredients that's going on the label, then that's obviously also needs to be underpinned by a good quality system, and obviously, PT is an important part of that as well.
Yes, definitely, yes.
Okay, so perhaps maybe a key question. What should be on the label? Maybe I could look at you, Valerie, first to take that question.
Yeah, so if we first look at what should be on the label, generally speaking, we need to mention that the Codex Alimentarius has published a general standard for the labeling of prepackaged food. This is a standard. This is not mandatory, but most national and international standards are based on this Codex standard. US, Canada, European Union, India, China. Really, all the big and important standards are based on that. It's also important to mention that the standardization does not prevent differences across countries. And if we look at the example of European Union, for instance, the rules, even from the same document, the rules might be interpreted differently by different authorities. Just to take one example about something that is quite trendy, just to illustrate that even if the rules are harmonized, there can be difference in different member states. One very popular, well, it is to be more and more popular products is what we name vegetarian or vegan product, including vegetarian or vegan meat. Well, so-called meat. In the EU, it is okay to give a meaty name to such products. So you can have a vegan burger or something like that. But in France, this is prohibited. So if a company is intending to sell the same product in different countries in Europe, but including France, they will need to have different packages and different labelings to address different countries.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe Savas, you can give a bit more information and detailed information about what should be on the label.
Yeah, but I mean, I completely agree that labeling very much depends on the destination market of the product. So even if you are following a different regulations in your within your country, if you want to export to a country that follows different regulations, then you need to comply with those regulations. There are differences and exceptions in different jurisdictions, but basically we've got here the example of the European Union Food Information for Consumers regulation, for which I need to mention that there is also a proposal for a revision of the regulation by the Commission. So basically, in most regulations, the following have to be part of the label. So the name of the food, obviously the ingredient list, including any additives, information about allergens, the quantity of certain ingredients, if the ingredient is stated on the sample, on the name of the food. For example, Amalfi lemon cheesecake, then you need to declare how much of that Amalfi lemon you used, for example. Date marking, so best before, use by dates, country of origin, if this is part of the regulation, so usually for meat products. Obviously, nutrition declaration of energy, fat, carbohydrates. Depending on the regulation, you have to. Some are mandatory, some are not mandatory. The net quantity of the product, any special storage conditions, any instructions on how to use it. If we are talking about beverages, then the alcohol level needs to be declared if it's higher than 1.2%. As Paul said previously, and Valerie, so labels should provide a basis to final consumers to make informed choices, to make safe use of food, and even regards to to consumers' health, but also to take into consideration any economic, environmental, social, and ethical issues as well.
And I think for me that covered pretty much, most of everything. And, the only thing that I would add is, at least in the dietary supplement, the sports nutrition industry, ingredient fact panel, a lot of brands use proprietary blends. So they may make a blend of their various ingredients, or they may have a trade name for a product, of a botanical ingredient or something else. And so just using a trade name or just using proprietary blend isn't enough. You really have to identify what are the ingredients that make up that proprietary blend. You don't have to give the formula, you don't have to give the amount of time, but you have to at least disclose what those ingredients are that make up the blend. In the case of our banned substance certification programs, Informed Choice, Informed Sport, it's really important that they understand what botanicals are in there, because they may, some botanical ingredients do contain banned substances in them. So it's very important when they're using this, they clearly understand what is in the product from an ingredient standpoint, not just a generic term.
Okay, thank you. Maybe Savas, I could just come back on something that you said, and I'm not sure whether this is clear yet, but you said there was a proposal for a revision of the regulation on food information to consumers. Do we at this stage have any idea whether that's going to mean more information on labels, or maybe better clarification on the guidelines, or maybe we don't know the details yet?
We don't really know the details yet. I mean, there was a consultation going on for a few months, I think 6 months, and consumers could participate. Obviously, food industry could participate as well. So I think the Commission will take all those comments from the consultation, and I think from what I've read, there is a push to include a kind of front of pack labeling on the label, front of pack information across the EU. As Valerie said, in France they started using it. I think in Germany as well. In the United Kingdom, although not part of the EU anymore, but they started using the front of pack information many years ago. So while a member of the EU, but yeah, there is a push from the consumer organizations definitely to have something in the front of the pack, but it proves to be a challenging issue, and well, let's see what the final revision will be.
Okay, thank you for that, Savas. Now, we've just talked about what should be on the label, but what about what should not be on the label? I don't know, Savas, if you want to sort of perhaps carry on speaking,
yeah,
and, to address that first.
Yeah, so what should not be on the label? For this question, we will basically focus on the claims that sometimes are present on the label. So, for example, in the United States and other jurisdictions like Australia or Canada, nutrition claims and other claims, but not the reduction of disease claims, so not medical claims, they are allowed to be self-substantiated by food industry, by food companies. So this basically enables food businesses to make a variety of different claims without disclosing any evidence. But as I said, this is not applicable to medical claims. It's just nutrition and other claims. In the European Union, manufacturers are allowed to promote the nutritional health benefits of their food products as long as the benefits are scientifically proven, and basically the same rules apply to nutrition and other claims with reduction of disease claims in the EU, whereas in other jurisdictions they can be less or more strict, usually less strict. So there is a regulation 1924 of 2006 which is basically about nutrition and health claims made on a food label. And all these can be found on a database which is available to everyone. So you can actually, if you buy a product and there is a health claim or a nutrition claim on the product, if you are curious enough and you actually read the label, basically, well, you can actually use the database and see if the claim is an approved claim or a claim that should not be present on the label. I don't know if Valerie.
Yeah, to add on, there's just a few examples of claims that can be used or that cannot be used, and just also to give an idea of, I would say, how substantiated those claims must be. So, for instance, if your product claims to be low fat, this is very well defined. The product must not contain more than 3 grams per 100 grams of fat if it's a solid product. If you want to claim for high protein, for instance, means that at least 20% of the energy value of the food will be provided by protein. Well, there are a long list of nutrition claims. For instance, if you claim for reduced any nutrient, reduced sugar, reduced fat, etc., the reduction in content must be at least 30% compared to a similar product. Some exception to that, so this is for sugars, fat, etc. For nutrients, it can be only a 10% difference, that's acceptable, and for sodium, 25% difference is acceptable. So that's for all the nutrition claims, and there are hundreds of claims, as Savas mentioned. If you look at this document, it's really an impressive list. There are also a number of health claims that can or most likely cannot be used, and they all have to be based on scientific evidence. For instance, a claim that potassium contributes to the normal functioning of the nervous system. This is an authorized claim because the health relationship has been proven. If you want to claim that on your product, dietary fibers help to reduce fat absorption, this is not authorized. The reason is that the health relationship between the two has not been proven. So this is not acceptable. And if you look at the full list of health claims, there are actually far more non-authorized than authorized claim, because it's 2,090 that are listed as non-authorized, and only 267 that are listed as authorized. So clearly, there is a, I mean, if a food manufacturer wants to put any claims, whether it's a nutritional or a health claim or their products, they have to be quite cautious with what they can say or not as a claim.
Yes.
On what what they can do or not, but it's quite short, I would say.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, so sorry, Paul, you wanted to?
No, I was just going to add, I mean, obviously you covered everything. I think claims is probably the biggest thing that shouldn't be on a label, you know, as we've just discussed. But, you know, working in certification, you know, business with our Inform programs, you know, it's also making misleading claims around what those marks and those logos or marks actually mean on the package. You know, for example, Inform Sport, we're testing for the absence of banned substances for that we're testing for on the product. So, but you know, we'll have companies that may look at that and say, well, the Inform Sport logo means the product is safe, or the product works. You know, that the efficacy is there. Really making sure that they're not making misleading statements about what these certification marks really mean. I think that's something that we always have to look at and we have to police. Because brands will take what a mark is intended to be and try to maybe stretch it into something beyond what it was intended to be.
Okay, thank you. Savas, was there anything else that you were going to add at all?
Yeah, I just wanted to add, I mean, we talked about nutrition claims, health claims. So I think overall these claims, they may not be false or mislead consumers or imply that compared to some other similar kind of food, it would be more nutritious or safer comparing one food to the other, or encourage excess consumption of a food product. So let's all drink green tea because it lowers the risk of cardiovascular disease, just because the claim is on a label, or suggest that a balanced diet would not provide sufficient amounts of nutrients, so you need to start consuming our product if you want to have a balanced diet. And obviously, the label must not contain any statement that could scare consumers, just to cause panic. And also, I mean, as we all said, the manufacturers and also the importers, they must submit to, they have to be able to submit to national authorities the evidence to back their claim. So scientific evidence to support the claim that they make on their label.
Okay, thank you. Well, we've talked about what should be on the label, what should not be on the label. I mean, is there any critical legislation around labeling and the contents of a label that perhaps the panel would like to talk about? I mean, maybe Valerie, you'd like to take that one first.
Yes, it's well, it's not always a legislation. Well, there are some compliance rules, and well, I'm not aware of compliance rules in all territories. Just what I know is that they can be quite different depending on the territory. So, for instance, in the US, it's, I would say, quite clear. There is a code. It's the Code of Federal Regulation Title 21, and this is a document that is issued by the FDA. So it's a very official document. In the EU, it's probably more tricky because it's not strictly speaking a regulation. It's a guidance document, again, guidance document for the control of compliance with the EU legislation for foodstuffs and for food supplements. So in the EU, this document cannot be regarded as an official interpretation of the legislation, but of course it can be used by as a tool, let's say, by competent authorities in terms of investigation. So what those documents would say, and the approach is different in the US and in the EU. So in the US, it's the same. It's basically the same regulation for food and supplements, but there is a differentiation based on the fact that whether the nutrient would be naturally present in the product or if it is added as a nutrient. So if a lab compares what's actually in the product with what is on the label, in the US, the rule is that if it's a natural ingredient, natural nutrient, it should be at least 80% of the label value. If it's something that has been added to the product, and this is quite typical for added minerals or vitamins or whatever, it has to be at least the value that is on the label. So if it's not at the value on the label, it will be considered as misbranded. It will also be considered misbranded if the calories or the nutrient content is exceeding the label value by 20%. There are some they call reasonable excess or reasonable deficiencies that are acceptable, but this is not clear what is considered as reasonable. In the EU, it's so again, it's not an official document, it's a guidance, but it's, I think, probably more clear in terms of what is acceptable or what is not acceptable. And there are two categories: there are foods and there are supplements. So for food, if you look at the vitamins, there is the actual value for the vitamins can be anything between -35 up to +50%. Sorry, -35% up to +50% compared to the value on the label. For minerals, it's between 35 and 45, and for all other nutrients, fat, sugar, etc., there is, I would say, basically a ±20% tolerance. It's slightly different if we are considering a product that contains very high or very low value of a nutrient. It's not a percentage rule that apply. It will be a fixed value, but that's it. And what is also important is that those values and those acceptable values will include the uncertainty of measurement. So this is for food. For supplements, it's a different rule that applies. So in food, for vitamins, the tolerance will be -35 to up to +50%. If it's a supplement, it will be anything between -20% and up to +50% in the product. And again, this includes the value, the uncertainty of measurement. I would like to say that it's even a little bit more complex than that, because you have to consider the rounding of the value to really decide if a product is in the right zone or not. And I would just like to add something about that also. Well, compliance with labeling is something that is very important and critical, and this is something that we are now addressing in proficiency testing as well. So Savas has mentioned that we are addressing nutritional labeling in many different products. Compliance with labeling is something that we are addressing in one of our dietary supplement sample. This is for multi-element. So in this sample, participants have to test the sample itself for all the different elements, but they can also provide, we also provide a label with the sample, and participants can assess the compliance between the label and the values that originate from their testing. So based on the guideline, if they are in the EU, or based on the FDA regulation if they are in the US.
Okay, thank you, Valerie. And there's no doubt that this whole world of labeling is clearly complex. Obviously, clearly varies by the type of product, or indeed different parts of the world. It's good to see that we've some sort of PTs out there to help, maybe to assess the labeling against some compliance rules. But perhaps that might lead me to perhaps another question in terms of what challenges do producers face in meeting label compliance demands? Maybe I could turn to you first on this one, Paul.
Yeah, well, I think that from a labeling standpoint, obviously, probably the biggest challenge is the testing and verifying, one, that the product is what it's supposed to be. Identity testing of the raw materials, contaminant testing for things like heavy metals, pesticides, other types of microbials, banned substances, like with the programs that we certify. Even with the testing, we're still finding that there are challenges. Protein is a perfect example that, within the industry, there's a lot of protein products that are not meeting label claim, and there's ways that, producers can actually trick the tests, by adding nitrogen-rich ingredients that isn't protein. To try to get an analytical reading saying, they typically measure nitrogen to measure how much protein is in the product. Well, there's ingredients that you can put in there to boost the nitrogen content, and they call it amino spiking. And so we see, some of that we'll see just not meeting label claim. So we've actually developed a program, Informed Protein, very specifically around that. We found 25% of products that we've pulled from the shelves in stores, over 60 products, 25% did not meet label claims. Some of them were down only 27% to label claims. So it was quite startling. But you know, those challenges, you know, are there. They're prevalent, and you know, platforms such as Amazon is a perfect example where they've recognized the problem with products that are being sold on their store. So they've now required brands to go and prove that they're made in a GMP facility. They've been tested for contaminants. They've been tested for label claim. There's a number of things that they have to do to prove to Amazon that their product is what they say it is, and it's relatively simple for them to use. And then but you know, this is a lot that a company has to go through just to sell through this platform. But then what they've done is they've said, okay, well, there's these certification bodies, Informed Choice, Informed Sport. Those are two of them. They said if your product is certified, you just need to show us a certificate of certification for that product, and that checks the boxes for all those other things that they require to sell on their platform. And so Amazon is doing this. You're starting to see other major retailers doing the same thing, where they have a testing protocol in place where the products have to be tested before they'll actually sell it within their stores. So, you know, there's quite a bit of work that brands have to do now to sell through these various platforms and even brick and mortar stores than they did, say, just a few years ago.
Yeah, I mean, I cannot here. I guess we all remember the melamine scandal in China a few years ago. That basically melamine was being used to increase the protein content in theory, but it wasn't protein. It was basically nitrogen. So yeah, I mean, mislabeled food is an offense. Falsely describing, advertising, or presenting food is an offense. So mislabeled food that deceives the consumer can also create unfair competition between manufacturers and traders. I think it's fair to say that everyone, we as consumers, we have the right to know that the food we buy from the supermarket or from wherever, from Amazon, if it's matches the description given on the label. That's what we want. I mean, I've read a survey. It was a Eurobarometer, as it's called. It's a survey between you know, in different countries in Europe, and not all consumers actually understand what's on the label. But I think the information is there, and it's available for consumers to read, and we all want to buy what's in the packaging and that matches the label, basically. And I think I should also mention that food fraud is a growing problem, and some of the incidents are linked to mislabeling, because food fraud is a broad term, but it happens in many ways, including mislabeling of a food product or a food supplement, as Paul mentioned.
Okay, thank you, Savas. Now, I think we've been talking quite a lot about the labeling in terms of the content and some of the regulation around that. Maybe I'd like to perhaps turn our attention now, perhaps beyond the content information, and to ask the question: what does it, what else does a label represent to a consumer? Maybe Paul, I could start with you.
You know, like I said earlier, you know, this is the first impression that a customer has to the product, but probably more important to the brand. You know, you're selling that product to them. So, you know, a lot of people, it's not just about the information, you know, here's what it is, here's the ingredients, you know, here's the, you know, allergens and things like that. It's really making that connection. There's a lot of noise in the industry. There's a lot of products that they're selling up against. And so I think it's, you know, like I said before, it's really important from a factual standpoint to state what it is, what it does for them, but then also opportunities to talk more about what the product is. You know, a lot of brands will use this to cross-sell into other types of products that if you use in conjunction with another product, it could enhance the effectiveness of the product. So there's not a lot of other things outside of just, you know, claims or just the ingredients that are on there, you know, where you can take advantage of this. But that's, you know, a lot of brands, it's not just about, you know, just flash or color. It's really about making that connection. It's about developing the trust with the consumer, and again, making them feel, you know, when they're looking at this, is okay, this is a brand that I can trust.
Okay, thank you. Stavros, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, I mean, as I said previously, deliberate mislabeling is fraud and the criminal offense. And misdescription of food obviously deceives the consumers. It can trick people into buying something that they would not buy otherwise. And it also poses risks to consumers that might be intolerant or allergic to certain foods. So, for example, I don't know, I'm sure it happens in the food supplements field as well. I mean, if a supplement is supposed to be dairy-free, and in the end it contains dairy, and you buy it and you are allergic to milk, then it can be dangerous. And we have an example of an example of food fraud that was related to incorrect labeling. So 10 years ago, I'm sure you all remember the horse meat adulteration scandal. So basically, food products like burgers that were advertised as containing beef, I think it was the first discovery, were found to contain undeclared or improperly declared horse meat, as much as 100% of the meat in some cases. So it was it's an example of a huge scandal across Europe, and as a result of that, in the UK, DEFRA, the Department of Food and Agriculture and Environment, asked Professor Chris Elliott to review the food system. And although there has been progress the last 10 years, for example, in the UK, the National Food Crime Unit was created. And also the Food Authenticity Network was created in 2015 in the UK. And it was led by LGC and Selvarani Elahi. The EU Food Fraud Network was also established in 2013 as a result of the horse meat scandal. And you know, talking about UK, since the EU exit, the UK has unfortunately lost access to rapid alert and intelligence systems like RASF or the Food Fraud Network, which doesn't help, because you know, working together can only be helpful. You know, information sharing between countries can only be helpful in the fight against food fraud or mislabeling.
Okay. Yeah, thank you, Stavros. Maybe I'd like to perhaps turn to you, Paul, for perhaps this next question. I mean, sort of been asked, what do authentic product certifications offer to brands and product producers?
Yeah, it's actually a really good question. You know, a lot of people, when they first think about, well, the certification, they think about, well, the product's been tested, so we certify that the product is what they say it is. And you know, product certifications are so much more than that. And the brands that have certified their products and have promoted it properly have been really, really successful with it, because it's not just about everything behind the certification. So it's the review of the supply chain from the raw material supplier, ensuring that controls are in place that manufacturers are using to choose their raw material suppliers, to the equipment, you know, the cleaning, the handling of raw materials in the facility. You know, it's the whole supply chain, looking at everything from start to finish. And you know, just to give you an example, you know, we've done surveys all over the world, and have tested products for the first time that are not certified, and we've seen that about 1 in 10 samples, you know, could test positive for a banned substance. After brands have gone through our program, go through the whole audit process, the testing process, we see that number go to about 1 in 5,000 samples we see a screening indication for something. So it shows that the certification works. But you know, from a consumer standpoint, there's a trust deficit. There was a survey done, an industry survey done years ago, that showed there was a 40% trust deficit from consumers. So they didn't trust that the product worked, or they didn't trust that it was safe for them to use because of maybe what they heard in the media about, you know, people having adverse reactions to certain ingredients. So there's a trust deficit, and it's an issue for the industry. And what certifications do is it shows that there's a third party who is looking at that, not just the product, it's looking at the manufacturing process, it's looking at supply chain, it's looking at everything. And ensuring that not just the product, it works, but it's also safer for them to use. And so, you know, we always encourage brands to do this. Is, you know, consumers are always, we're all consumers. When we look at to buy a product, what do? We look at reviews. We look at what people are saying about the product. You know, do they have problems with it? Do they like the product? What is it? They're trying to get some validation of, is this a good product? Is it a good brand? Can I trust them? And so that's what certifications do, is it provides that validation that this is a reputable brand. It's because when you're selling, you're not just selling a product, you're selling your brand. You're selling, here's who we are. Because if they're buying your protein product or your vitamin D product or your pre-workout product, if they trust that product works and they feel good about it, they're going to buy your other products. And so, you know, it's about brand loyalty. And these certifications are really about that. It's about establishing that confidence and that trust with that consumer, and then building that loyalty with the brands. And then for supplement companies, when they're looking for contract manufacturers, they want to ensure that they're looking for somebody who has high quality standards. And if they produce a product through them, they're not going to have problems, you know, down the road. If somebody pulls a product off the shelf and it's not meeting label claim, or it contains a banned substance, this potentially could come back on that brand and be very costly. And so you have, you know, supplement companies looking for contract manufacturers that have gone through our certification process, because they have more confidence that that manufacturer is going to produce a good product that they're not going to have issues with.
Okay, thank you, Paul. That's very interesting. Now, we've had a couple of good questions that I've received from the audience today. So maybe I could just perhaps turn to the first one from Stuart Walker. Now, he's from Australia, and he says that he's a little puzzled by the labelling on UK products that show percentage of reference intake for an average adult. For example, tomato puree, 1 tablespoon, 15 grams, is labelled for fat to contain less than 1% RI. And he's interested, does the panel think that this labelling is not useful and clutters the label and confuses the average customer? So an interesting question. I don't know which of you might like to take that.
I guess, I don't know, I guess it depends on how knowledge about the customer is, but we should not expect from every consumer to be to know how to interpret the label. But maybe it's not part, as we said, the label has to be accurate and gives information to the consumer that they can make use of. I don't know. I don't have an opinion exactly on that example. Anyone else? Valerie or Paul, have you got any?
I think there's a lot of information on a label, and I think a lot of it, most people just gloss over, the daily recommended value, and a percentage. Well, what does that mean to the most people? So they really don't know, but some people they do, and this is they're looking for these types of things. Some people are just looking for what are the ingredients. Some are looking for what is the protein content or what is the fat. So many things that are on there, and it's not going to, it's not for everybody. Everybody has something specific looking for, and in this case, maybe there's somebody looking for that. But yeah, that's the thing. I think they try to cover as much as possible on the label from a nutritional side of things, and sometimes it's relevant, sometimes it's not to the consumer.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. Well, thank you for the question, Stuart. I hope the panel have at least partially addressed that your question. So we've got I think we've got time for one more question that I've received here. This is from Dominic Hassan. A good question. It says, do label manufacturers have a font size to adhere to? Some labels are the font is very small and unreadable, particularly at night time. I don't know from your knowledge of the regulations whether there is anything. Valerie, perhaps.
Yeah, looking at the different individual regulations, there are different recommendations. Well, I think it's not just a recommendation; it's mandatory. It's mandatory information about the font size, but they are different across different regulations. So and they don't. There is. I probably cannot say always a regulation about the font size, but there is generally one. But it's not the same everywhere for sure. But if you buy a product in the UK, you would expect that it's the font size would be the same, because what is important is not where the product is produced, it's where it's sold. So it's in one country you would expect to have the same font size for any label.
Yeah, I mean the font size and the area is where the ingredient should be present on a label is regulated, at least in the EU that I'm aware of. I'm sure I've read the FDA guide that the font and how big the font should be is also regulated. But as we all mentioned, the information on the label, they must be easy to understand and easy to see. Not only accurate, but easy to understand and easy to see. That's part of the regulations in some countries or areas.
Yeah, there is regulations around that. It's not one specific font size, for everything. So obviously, if you have a very small package, you can't have, big packaging. Otherwise, that's the only supplement facts on there. But yeah, so there are regulations that the size based on the size font based on the size label.
Okay, thank you for that. I think I think there is there certainly is UK legislation, and then there certainly is certain legislation around font size and so on, and I believe also the same from FSA. I think that's all the time we've got for questions. Just excuse me a minute. So I just want to perhaps remind everybody that if they would like to discover more information, a couple of websites for them to go to. There's the lgcstandards.com/Axio, where you can find more information out about some of the PT schemes that's available. And if you want to find out more about our work on from LGC Informed, then you can go to wetestYoutrust.com. Otherwise, by all means, contact us at any time at axio@lgcgroup.com, or at least and join us online. Follow us in both LinkedIn and Twitter. So that just leaves me now to thank our panel members, Valerie, Savas, and Paul, for some a very interesting discussion. Clearly, a complex field for sure. And so thank you for addressing those questions. And thank you for everybody who's joined our panel discussion today. I hope it's been useful. And thank you very much. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everybody. Bye.
Thank you.